Gabrielle Walker's life had been defined by a commitment to justice, but a single moment would ignite a passion for something even greater: the power to reshape an entire company. What started as a personal fight for fairness soon evolved into a mission that would challenge the very core of the airline industry. When Gabrielle faced an unimaginable betrayal from within her own company, she could have walked away. Instead, she chose to fight, not just for herself, but for the countless others silenced and overlooked for far too long. Behind the closed doors of the airline, a storm was brewing, one that threatened to expose deep-rooted issues no one had dared to confront. Gabrielle's relentless pursuit of justice would lead her into a battle against a system built on inequality, where the stakes were higher than she ever imagined. But as she rose to lead the charge for change, Gabrielle discovered that true transformation wasn't just about fixing policies. It was about rewriting the company's very soul. Would she break through the resistance or be crushed by the weight of the status quo? Stay tuned to find out. Before we dive deeper into this gripping story, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, Epic Story Moments, yet, now is the perfect time. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update, and be the first to hear our incredible new stories. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support more heartwarming tales like this. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. The air inside the bustling terminal buzzed with a mixture of jet fuel and anticipation. Passengers hurried past Gabrielle Walker, dragging suitcases behind them, their faces filled with a range of emotions from excitement to exhaustion and stress. For Gabrielle, it was supposed to be just another routine trip, another meeting, another negotiation. She pulled her sleek carry-on suitcase, its polished leather gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and adjusted her scarf. Her tailored navy business suit and pearl earrings spoke volumes about her success. Approaching the first-class check-in counter, Gabrielle couldn't help but notice the subtle glances she often received in places like this. Some were admiring, while others seemed tinged with something less pleasant. She smiled at the attendant, handed over her ID and ticket, and waited patiently as the process unfolded. "All set, Miss Walker," the attendant said, her tone polite but brisk. "Your gate is B14. Enjoy your flight." Gabrielle returned the smile, collecting her boarding pass. The transaction was seamless, yet a faint shadow of unease crept up her spine. It was a feeling she had learned to trust over the years, but she dismissed it, attributing it to the stress of the upcoming meeting. As she walked toward security, she could already hear the faint calls for final boarding from nearby gates. The security line was moderately long but moved quickly. Gabrielle joined the queue, placing her laptop and shoes into a bin with practiced efficiency. She passed through the metal detector without incident, but just as she began to gather her things, a stern voice called out behind her, "Ma'am, step aside for additional screening." Startled, Gabrielle turned to see a tall man in a crisp TSA uniform standing a few feet away. His cold blue eyes locked onto hers. His badge read James Cole. His voice was firm, almost dismissive, as though he had already made up his mind about her. "Is there a problem?" Gabrielle asked, keeping her tone neutral. Cole motioned toward her carry-on. "Random inspection. Step aside." Gabrielle sighed internally but nodded. Random inspections were not uncommon, though this didn't feel random at all. She moved to the designated area, where Cole began rifling through her belongings with a casual indifference that felt almost performative. He held up her boarding pass, squinting at it. "This looks fake," he said, his voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Gabrielle's stomach dropped. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice shaking but trying to remain calm. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, ignoring her shock. Gabrielle kept her voice steady, though a sharp edge crept in. "I purchased it through my company's travel agency. It's valid." Cole didn't even look up. "We'll see about that." By now, a few travelers had slowed down, their curiosity piqued. Gabrielle could feel their eyes on her, judging, questioning her legitimacy. Her heart raced. But her years of handling high-stakes corporate negotiations had taught her how to mask such emotions. "Sir, if you could just check the barcode, you'll see that it's valid," she said, her voice firm. Cole scoffed. "People like you always think you can cheat the system." He held up her ticket, as though displaying a piece of counterfeit evidence to a jury. The comment stung, but Gabrielle clenched her hands into fists at her sides. "People like me?" she repeated, her voice dropping an octave. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Cole's face flushed, but he didn't back down. "You heard me?" Before Gabrielle could respond, Cole stepped away and spoke into his radio. Moments later, 2 additional officers arrived. Gabrielle's pulse quickened. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was turning into a spectacle. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with us, ma'am," Cole said, his tone officious yet laced with a faint hint of smugness. Gabrielle glanced at the growing crowd, then back at the officers. She knew she had nothing to hide, but the indignity of the situation gnawed at her. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her composure. "Fine. Lead the way." As she followed the officers to a side door, her mind raced. She needed to call Victor. He would know how to handle this. But before she could reach for her phone, one of the officers snatched it from her hand. "No phones," Cole said curtly. Gabrielle stared at him, disbelief washing over her. "This is absurd." "You can explain that to us in the back," he replied, his tone icy. The door closed behind her, and the noise of the terminal faded away. She was now alone with her thoughts, and the gravity of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger, something that had followed her in one form or another her entire life. Little did Cole know, the woman he had just humiliated was not someone who would crumble under pressure. She was someone who thrived in it. The air in the back room was stifling, a stark contrast to the open, chaotic energy of the terminal. Gabrielle sat on a metal chair, her hands resting on the cold table in front of her. The walls were bare, save for a clock that ticked too loudly, mocking the silence. Across from her, Officer James Cole leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her like a predator sizing up its prey. His smirk was faint but unmistakable. "Let's start again," Cole said, dropping her boarding pass onto the table with a dramatic flourish. "Where exactly did you get this?" Gabrielle met his gaze, her expression calm despite the storm of emotions brewing beneath. "I've already explained. It was issued by my company's travel agency. Do you have proof?" His tone was laced with sarcasm, as if he already knew her answer. She exhaled sharply. "My phone, which you confiscated, has the confirmation email." Cole's smirk widened. "Convenient." Gabrielle didn't flinch. Years of navigating corporate boardrooms had taught her how to stay composed under scrutiny. She wasn't about to let this man rattle her, no matter how blatant his contempt. "Why don't you check with the airline?" she suggested, her voice measured. "Oh, we will," Cole said, straightening. "But first, I have a few more questions." "Questions that could easily be answered if you verified my ticket," Gabrielle countered, her patience thinning. "Instead, you've chosen to humiliate me publicly and detain me without cause." Cole chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "You're awfully confident for someone in your position." Gabrielle leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "And you're awfully reckless for someone in yours." The smile slipped from Cole's face, replaced by a flicker of irritation. Before he could respond, the door opened, and a second officer entered. A woman this time. Her uniform was crisp, her expression unreadable as she handed Cole a folder. "Here's her file," the officer said, glancing briefly at Gabrielle before stepping back. Cole opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. Gabrielle could see his confidence falter, his smug demeanor cracking ever so slightly. He looked up, his gaze sharper now, almost calculating. "Corporate attorney, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You must think you're pretty untouchable." Gabrielle didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth was written all over the file. The air in the terminal buzzed with energy, the scent of jet fuel lingering in the air as passengers rushed past Gabrielle Walker. She could feel the weight of the day pressing on her. Another business trip, another round of negotiations. Her sleek leather suitcase glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights as she adjusted her scarf, trying to shake off the weariness of the journey ahead. Her navy business suit, paired with delicate pearl earrings, reflected the success she'd worked so hard for. Approaching the first-class check-in counter, Gabrielle couldn't help but notice the glances she often received in places like this. Some were admiring, but others carried an unmistakable undertone. She smiled at the attendant, handed over her ID and ticket, and waited. The transaction was smooth, though a faint unease crept up her spine, a feeling she'd learned to trust over the years. She pushed it aside, attributing it to the stress of the upcoming meeting. When the attendant handed her boarding pass and mentioned her gate, Gabrielle smiled politely. But as she made her way to security, her sense of discomfort lingered. The line was long but moved quickly, and with practiced efficiency, she placed her laptop and shoes into a bin. She passed through the metal detector without issue, only for a voice to call out behind her, "Ma'am, step aside for additional screening." Gabrielle turned, startled, to see a tall TSA officer with cold blue eyes locking onto hers. His badge read James Cole. His tone was firm, almost dismissive, as though he had already decided something about her. "Is there a problem?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. "Random inspection," he replied, motioning to her carry-on. "Step aside." Gabrielle sighed internally, her annoyance growing. Random inspections were common, but this felt different. She moved to the designated area, where Cole began rifling through her belongings with casual indifference. "This looks fake," he said loudly, holding up her boarding pass. Gabrielle's stomach dropped. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she tried to understand what was happening. Cole didn't even glance at her. "Where did you get this?" "I purchased it through my company's travel agency," Gabrielle replied, her tone steady but sharp. "We'll see about that," Cole muttered, dismissively waving her off. By now, other passengers had stopped, watching with curious eyes. Gabrielle felt their judgment, their silent questioning, but she knew how to mask her emotions. "Sir, if you could just check the barcode, you'll see that it's valid," Gabrielle said firmly. Cole scoffed. "People like you always think you can cheat the system." The comment stung, but Gabrielle remained composed. "People like me?" she asked, her voice suddenly colder. Cole's face flushed, but he didn't back down. "You heard me?" Before Gabrielle could respond, Cole stepped away, speaking into his radio. Moments later, 2 more officers appeared. Gabrielle's pulse quickened, sensing that this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was becoming a spectacle. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with us, ma'am," Cole said, his voice laced with a hint of smugness. Gabrielle's eyes flicked around, meeting the gaze of the growing crowd. She had nothing to hide, but the humiliation of the situation gnawed at her. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "Fine, lead the way." As they walked through a side door, Gabrielle reached for her phone, intent on calling Victor. But before she could even grab it, one of the officers snatched it from her hand. "No phones," Cole said curtly. Gabrielle stared at him in disbelief. "This is absurd," she said, but Cole merely replied with a cold, "You can explain that to us in the back." The door closed behind her, and the noise of the terminal faded away. Now, in the stillness of the back room, Gabrielle felt the weight of the situation settle in. This wasn't just about her. It was about something much deeper, something that had followed her in one form or another her entire life. But little did Cole know, the woman he had just humiliated was not someone who would crumble under pressure. She was someone who thrived in it. The room was stifling, the contrast from the chaotic terminal sharp. Gabrielle sat on a metal chair, hands resting on the cold table in front of her. The walls were bare except for a clock that ticked too loudly, mocking the silence. Officer James Cole stood by the door, arms crossed, watching her like a predator sizing up its prey. His smirk was faint but unmistakable. "Let's start again," Cole said, dropping her boarding pass onto the table with dramatic flair. "Where exactly did you get this?" Gabrielle met his gaze, her expression calm despite the storm brewing inside her. "I've already explained. It was issued by my company's travel agency. Do you have proof?" Cole's tone dripped with sarcasm, as though he already knew her answer. Convenient, Gabrielle didn't flinch. Years of navigating corporate boardrooms had taught her how to stay composed under scrutiny, and she wasn't about to let this man rattle her. "Why don't you check with the airline?" she suggested, her voice measured. "We will," Cole replied, his confidence returning. "But first, I have a few more questions." Gabrielle raised an eyebrow. "Questions that could easily be answered if you simply verified my ticket," she countered. "Instead, you've chosen to humiliate me publicly and detain me without cause." Cole chuckled a low, condescending sound. "You're awfully confident for someone in your position." Gabrielle leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "And you're awfully reckless for someone in yours." Before Cole could respond, the door opened again. This time, it wasn't another officer, it was Victor. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Victor was tall, commanding, his presence magnetic. Dressed in a tailored suit, he looked more at home in a boardroom than an airport security office. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the officers and the tension that filled the air. "Victor," Gabrielle said, relief washing over her. "Are you all right?" Victor's voice was low but steady as he walked over to her. Gabrielle nodded. "For now." Victor turned to Cole, his expression unreadable. "Officer Cole, is it?" Cole straightened, trying to muster the weak remnants of his earlier confidence. Victor reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black wallet. He flipped it open to reveal a badge. "Victor Walker," he said calmly, "chairman of the board of this airline." The room fell silent. Gabrielle could see Cole's face turn pale as the second officer shifted uncomfortably. Victor's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority. "Would you care to explain why my wife has been detained and humiliated over a valid ticket?" I was just following protocol, sir," Cole stammered, his bravado crumbling. "And did you verify it with the airline?" Victor interrupted, his tone razor-sharp. "Well, not yet." Cole's voice trailed off. Victor held up a hand, silencing him. "Not yet? So, you made the decision to detain her without even confirming the validity of her ticket." Cole's mouth hung open, but no words came out. Gabrielle watched him squirm, a small part of her savoring the sight. She dealt with men like Cole before, bullies hiding behind their positions of power, never expecting to be called out. "This isn't just incompetence," Victor continued, his voice rising slightly. "This is harassment. It's unprofessional, unethical, and frankly, it's unacceptable." Cole's shoulders sagged. His earlier confidence was completely shattered. The second officer looked as though she wished she could disappear. Victor stepped closer, locking eyes with Cole. "I want a full report on this incident by the end of the day, including an explanation as to why standard verification procedures were ignored. Rest assured, this will not go unnoticed." Cole nodded mutely, his face a mix of fear and humiliation. Victor turned to Gabrielle, his expression softening. "Let's get you out of here." As they left the room, Gabrielle felt the weight lifting off her shoulders. But she knew this incident wasn't over, not by a long shot. Cole's actions had exposed a deeper issue, one that she couldn't ignore. Gabrielle knew that this was only the beginning. The room grew tense as Gabrielle's words echoed through the space. She stood unwavering, her gaze sharp and purposeful, unflinching even as Grayson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The evidence she had laid bare was damning, and she knew it would be impossible to dismiss. Her voice rang out again, cold but resolute, as she made her case for accountability. "You can try to spin this however you like, but the facts speak for themselves," she said, her tone unwavering. "This isn't just about me. This is about every person who's been mistreated, overlooked, or harmed by the system you've allowed to fester under your watch." Grayson's face was flushed with anger, but he could offer no retort. His earlier defensive posture had been stripped away, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Gabrielle knew that Victor had already secured a legal team that would see to it that the truth would not only be heard but acted upon. Victor stepped forward, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the intensity of the moment. "We've done more than just collect evidence," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his authority. "We've ensured that this will not go unanswered. The consequences of this breach of trust will be felt company-wide, starting with those who enabled it." Gabrielle turned to the boardroom, her eyes sweeping over the members with a steady gaze. "This is bigger than one officer. This is about the systemic issue that allows individuals like him to abuse their power without consequence. This is about changing the culture of this airline. This is about ensuring no one else has to endure what I did." As the room absorbed her words, the murmur of voices began to quiet. Each director, from the seasoned to the newer faces, had been forced to confront the fact that the system they had long trusted had been compromised. Victor, sensing the shift, continued with the quiet force that had always marked his leadership. "This will be a turning point for us. No more tolerating unethical behavior. No more letting it slide under the guise of procedure or tradition." The tension in the room was palpable. Yet beneath it all, there was a sense of resolve. Gabrielle's actions were not just about righting one wrong. They were about dismantling a system of complicity that had been allowed to thrive unchecked. As the meeting drew to a close, Gabrielle felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. She knew that the wheels of change would turn slowly, and the fight ahead would be long. But she was ready for it. This wasn't just her battle. It was a fight for justice on a larger scale. Later that evening, as she sat alone in her hotel room, the city lights blinking softly outside her window, Gabrielle reflected on the events of the day. Her phone buzzed with a message from Victor. The meeting with the board had been scheduled for the next morning. They were set to move forward, to confront the past, and to shape a new future. But Gabrielle wasn't just thinking about the immediate future. She was thinking about the long-term impact of what they were about to do. She had seen too many people like Cole get away with their actions, too many systems that allowed bad behavior to persist. Now, she was determined to ensure that things would be different. As she typed out the letter to the board, outlining her findings and the steps that needed to be taken, she felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about her personal grievance. It was about every voice that had been silenced, every injustice that had gone unaddressed. She had the power to change that, and she would. The next morning, Gabrielle walked into the boardroom with Victor by her side. The room was filled with the airline's senior leadership. They were all waiting for her to present the case she had so carefully built. She didn't waste time. With a steady hand, she took control of the room, presenting each piece of evidence with calm authority. She clicked through slide after slide, revealing the documented complaints against Cole, his unchecked promotion, and the clear pattern of misconduct. The room was silent, save for the occasional mutter of disbelief. Gabrielle's presence commanded respect, and her message was clear. The time for tolerance had ended. She wouldn't allow the system to continue to protect those who abuse their power. Not anymore. When Grayson arrived late, the tension reached its peak. His irritation was evident, but Gabrielle didn't flinch. She continued unyielding, pressing the final point home with the revelation of the email chain linking him to a personal scheme that funneled money from training funds into his own accounts. The evidence was irrefutable. The boardroom erupted in disbelief. But there was no escaping the truth. Victor was already in motion, ensuring the legal department had everything it needed to handle the fallout. Grayson's claims of misunderstanding were drowned out by the mounting evidence, and his eventual resignation seemed inevitable. As the meeting adjourned, Gabrielle and Victor exchanged a quiet look. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Gabrielle knew that the real work was just beginning. The challenge ahead would be to ensure that this moment of accountability led to lasting change, not just empty promises. But for now, Gabrielle allowed herself a moment of relief. She had fought for what was right, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like the fight might actually make a difference. Gabrielle walked into the meeting room, her demeanor calm, yet resolute. As she faced the board of directors, her thoughts raced. The moment she had been preparing for was finally here, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. She was determined to not only hold the individuals responsible, but to confront the much larger issue at hand. The entire system had been tainted, and it was time to shine a light on the corruption that had been allowed to fester for so long. Grayson, the director of security, had been brazen in his defense of Officer Cole, but Gabrielle knew better. It was clear now that the situation went far beyond just one man's actions. It was a reflection of a culture that enabled and even rewarded toxic behavior. As the meeting began, Gabrielle's words cut through the air, sharp and unwavering. "I was targeted yesterday by one of your security officers, James Cole," she began, making sure each word was heard. "He accused me of presenting a fake ticket, refused to verify my credentials, and then proceeded to humiliate me by handcuffing me, all without cause. This was not just a personal issue. This is a systemic problem rooted in bias and negligence." The room fell silent as Gabrielle clicked through her slides, each one more damning than the last. The documentation was clear. Numerous complaints against Officer Cole, all dismissed without action. Even more shocking was the discovery that Cole had been promoted, despite a clear record of misconduct. Gabrielle pointed to the signed document approving his promotion, and the room reacted with disbelief. One of the board members, a woman with piercing eyes, raised her hand. "Are you suggesting that Mr. Grayson knowingly promoted an officer with this record?" Gabrielle didn't flinch. "I'm not just suggesting it," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm stating it as fact." The door opened and Grayson entered, his expression tight with irritation. He had been summoned late to ensure he wouldn't have the chance to disrupt Gabrielle's presentation. Victor, standing beside Gabrielle, wasted no time. "Glad you could join us, Mr. Grayson," he said, his tone clipped and formal. Gabrielle moved forward, revealing surveillance footage from the terminal. The room was tense as they watched Cole detain Gabrielle, his actions aggressive and completely unjustified. But that wasn't all. There was more. Gabrielle shifted to the next slide, showing footage of Cole accepting a bribe from another passenger earlier that day. "This is your officer, Mr. Grayson," Gabrielle said, her voice cold. "And this is your department under your leadership." Grayson's face flushed a deep crimson. "This is taken out of context," he protested weakly. Victor slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! You failed this company, and you endangered the very passengers we're sworn to protect. Your excuses won't save you now." But Gabrielle wasn't finished. She clicked to the final slide, revealing an email chain between Grayson and a private contractor. "This is evidence of a scheme to divert funds meant for staff training into personal accounts," she said. "Mr. Grayson not only enabled unethical behavior, but actively profited from it." The room erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped as the board members demanded answers, but Grayson's defense faltered. "You can't prove anything," he muttered. "We already have," Victor interjected. "Legal counsel is reviewing the evidence as we speak. Your resignation will be submitted before the end of the day, or we'll proceed with termination and prosecution." Grayson slumped in his chair, his confidence shattered. The meeting ended swiftly with decisive action. Officer Cole was terminated, and Grayson's resignation was demanded on the spot. Gabrielle was asked to lead an external audit of the security department to ensure that such corruption would never happen again. As the board members filed out, Victor placed a reassuring hand on Gabrielle's shoulder. "You were incredible in there," he said. Gabrielle smiled faintly but didn't allow herself to relax. "This is just beginning. We've exposed the problem, but now we have to fix it." Victor nodded, his expression resolute. "And we will, together, That evening, Gabrielle sat in her office, reflecting on the events of the day. She knew that this fight was far from over. Systemic change required persistence, resilience, and the willingness to face resistance at every turn. But for the first time in years, she felt hopeful. Her phone buzzed, an incoming message from one of the directors. "Thank you for your courage today." This was a wake-up call. Gabrielle smiled, placing her phone down. She had always believed in the power of justice, but now she had the opportunity to wield it on a much larger scale, and she intended to use it wisely. The next morning, Gabrielle sat at the dining table, her laptop open in front of her as she reviewed her strategic plan for anti-discrimination and ethical oversight. The weight of what lay ahead settled heavily on her shoulders, but her resolve was stronger than ever. Her legal mind was sharp, and every policy, every training initiative, and every audit was designed to create a system of accountability that could never be ignored again. Later that day, she presented her plan to Victor over breakfast. His expression was unreadable as he scanned the document. When he finally looked up, his eyes shone with quiet admiration. "This is ambitious," he said. Gabrielle nodded, her voice firm. "It has to be. We're not just fixing the airline's reputation. We're setting a precedent for the entire industry." Victor hesitated. "The board won't like the cost of implementing this. It's going to take a lot of convincing." Gabrielle leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "Then let's convince them. They need to understand this isn't just about money. It's about integrity. And if they can't see that, they shouldn't be on the board." Victor chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Gabrielle smiled faintly. "You'd figure it out, but luckily you don't have to." That afternoon, Gabrielle received an unexpected call from Eleanor Carter, a sharp director who had supported her during the board meeting. "Mrs. Walker," Eleanor began, her tone brisk but warm, "I wanted to thank you for your presentation yesterday. It was eye-opening." Gabrielle was momentarily taken aback. "Thank you, Miss Carter. I appreciate your support." Eleanor hesitated for a moment. "I've been thinking, we need to make sure this doesn't get buried under corporate politics. I want to help you push this plan through." Gabrielle was surprised. Eleanor wasn't known for aligning herself with controversial initiatives. "That means a lot," she said. "But why the sudden interest?" Eleanor sighed. "Let's just say I've seen firsthand what happens when these issues are ignored. It's time I did something about it." Gabrielle nodded, sensing there was more to Eleanor's story than she was letting on. "Then let's make it happen." As news of Cole's dismissal and Grayson's resignation made headlines, the airline became the center of a media storm. Gabrielle knew this was both a blessing and a curse. Public scrutiny would force the board to act quickly, but any misstep could escalate the situation further. At the next board meeting, Gabrielle and Victor stood side by side, presenting the comprehensive plan Gabrielle had developed. Some directors were skeptical, questioning the feasibility of the timeline and the cost. Gabrielle met their gaze unflinchingly. "Feasibility isn't the issue here. Necessity is. The cost of doing nothing is far greater. Financially and morally," Victor added, "we've already seen the damage this has done to our reputation. This isn't just an investment in ethics. It's an investment in the future of the company." Eleanor Carter spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. "I agree with Mrs. Walker. This isn't a debate about cost. It's about whether we're willing to lead or continue following outdated practices. I, for one, am tired of following." Her endorsement shifted the mood in the room. Slowly, the directors began to nod in agreement. By the end of the meeting, the board voted overwhelmingly in favor of the plan. Gabrielle felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew the real work was only just beginning. Later that evening, as Gabrielle sat on the balcony of their home, a glass of wine in hand, the city lights twinkling in the distance, she felt a quiet sense of determination settle over her. There was still so much to do, but for the first time, it felt like they were on the right path. With Victor by her side, she knew they would continue pushing forward one step at a time. Gabrielle had always believed in justice, but this fight had reignited something deeper, an innate calling to lead and shape the world into something better than she had found it. With Victor by her side, she knew she would not stop until she saw that vision through. The airline's crisis was not just a scandal, it was a reckoning. Both Gabrielle and Victor understood that the systemic issues revealed by the incident extended far beyond one officer or one department. It was time to rebuild not just policies, but the very ethos of the company. Gabrielle's phone buzzed as she reviewed the latest audit findings in her office. She glanced at the name on the screen, which made her pause. Eleanor Carter. "Eleanor," Gabrielle greeted, her voice tinged with surprise. "What can I do for you?" Eleanor wasted no time. "I've been thinking about the bigger picture. Fixing the security department is a start, but what about the rest of the company?" Gabrielle leaned back in her chair, intrigued. "Go on." "We need a task force," Eleanor continued. "Something cross-departmental with real teeth, not just to address bias, but to ensure ethical practices across the board. And I want you to lead it." The words hung in the air for a moment. Gabrielle felt a flicker of pride, but with it came the weight of responsibility. "That's a significant undertaking," she said cautiously. "It won't be easy," Eleanor's tone softened. "But if anyone can do it, it's you." Gabrielle smiled faintly. "All right, let's make it happen." Over the next few weeks, Gabrielle worked tirelessly to form the task force. She handpicked members from across the company, focusing on individuals known for their integrity and innovation. Among them was Liam Patel, a rising star in HR known for his progressive policies, and Carmen Diaz, a veteran pilot who had long advocated for diversity in aviation. The first meeting was held in a sleek conference room with a large glass wall overlooking the runway. Gabrielle stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding attention. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of deeper issues within this company. Our job is to identify those issues and create real, lasting solutions." The room was silent for a moment. Then Liam spoke up. "Where do we start?" Gabrielle's lips curved into a determined smile. "We start by listening." The task force began hosting listening sessions with employees from every level of the company. Gabrielle sat in on many of them, hearing stories that were equal parts heartbreaking and enraging. A black flight attendant recounted being overlooked for promotions despite glowing reviews. A young Latino mechanic described how his ideas were dismissed by senior staff until a white colleague repeated them. Each story added fuel to Gabrielle's resolve. She took meticulous notes, weaving them into a comprehensive report that would form the foundation of their recommendations. But not everyone welcomed the changes. One morning, Gabrielle arrived at her office to find an anonymous note on her desk. "Stop stirring the pot before you drown in it." The words were scrawled in jagged handwriting, the meaning unmistakable. Victor was livid when he saw it. "This is unacceptable," he said, pacing the room. "We need to report this." Gabrielle shook her head. "No, that's exactly what they want me to back down, to be intimidated. I won't give them the satisfaction." But the threats didn't stop. Anonymous emails, snide comments in meetings, and even a tampered report designed to discredit her work. Each incident tested Gabrielle's resolve. Yet, she refused to waver. The turning point came during a company-wide town hall, where Gabrielle presented the task force's findings. The event was live-streamed to employees worldwide, making it the most public moment of her career. Standing on the stage, Gabrielle spoke with the conviction of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. "This company has a choice," she said. "We can cling to outdated practices and watch our reputation crumble, or we can lead the way in creating a more equitable and ethical industry. The world is watching, and so are our employees. What kind of legacy do we want to leave?" The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, Gabrielle felt the tide truly turning. Meanwhile, the investigation into Michael Grayson and James Cole uncovered more than anyone had expected. Grayson's embezzlement scheme had siphoned millions from training programs, while Cole's misconduct extended to falsifying reports and intimidating witnesses. Both men were not only fired but also faced criminal charges. Gabrielle watched as news outlets picked up the story. Their headlines a mix of justice served and corporate reckoning. It wasn't just about punishing individuals. It was about setting an example. Months later, the airline unveiled its new policies, which included mandatory bias training, revamped promotion criteria, and an anonymous reporting system for unethical behavior. Gabrielle stood beside Victor at the launch event, her heart swelling with pride. "This is only the beginning," she said quietly to him. "But it feels like the start of something real." Victor smiled, squeezing her hand. "That's because it is." Late one evening, Gabrielle returned to the airport where it all began. She walked past the security checkpoint, now staffed by officers who had undergone rigorous retraining. Some recognized her and nodded respectfully. She paused for a moment, taking in the bustling terminal, the chatter of travelers, the hum of 100 stories unfolding at once. This was what she had fought for, not just justice for herself, but for everyone who had been silenced, overlooked, or mistreated. As she boarded her flight, a sense of peace washed over her. The fight wasn't over, but she had already won the most important battle, proving that change was possible. For Gabrielle Walker, that was only the beginning. If you're inspired by Gabrielle's journey and want to see more stories of courage, leadership, and social change, hit the subscribe button and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an empowering story.